We really want to finish up all the healthcare stuff tonight if possible. I'm on page 136, so we're getting close to the bottom, 136 of the articles. So this guy in India, if we're talking about consumerism, what does consumerism cause? When the people using the service are also paying for it, what happens on the supply side? So part of this is this debate about not just the consumer, but the people providing services. So this could be something you could research. I don't know where this guy is today. That's a pretty unusual name, so you could probably find him on the internet. But when the supply side, responds to true consumers. Those using the services are paying for it. So they're asking about cost, they're asking about quality. How significant is that? And these numbers are pretty amazing. That's why I think, for that extra work you want to do, you could certainly say in the paper. I looked up Gokel, see what he's doing today, and this is what I found out. That would give you what you need for that extra work. So what is he doing? This is 10 years ago. He cut the price of artery clearing coronary bypass to $1,500, half of what it was 20 years ago, and wants to get the price down to 800. So that's where we are today. Did he get it down to 800 within a decade? The same procedure costs $106,000 at the Cleveland Clinic, and the Cleveland Clinic is one of those better performing healthcare system out there. That's pretty amazing. So it must be really, really low quality. But the article suggests that the quality is about the same. I forget where that says it in the article, but it's in here somewhere. I should have highlighted that part. But he's not doing it at lower quality. Somewhere in one of these articles, it might be the next article, but how can he do that? Now, obviously, he's in India, so maybe labor is cheaper. Maybe there's other things that are cheaper, but we're not talking a 10%. We're talking, 98% something reduction in costs. So it is possible. The chain uses web-based computer software to run logistics. So here's other way people are doing it rather than licensing, building. Can you get the supply side to start acting like a supply side where they're cutting costs, trying to get more competitive? You're not seeing that in the insurance-based system. Here's an article on Walmart. We talked about these. This is one more example of, again, the supply side. We talked about the Amazon effect, all these other things. So what happens when the employer starts focusing on doing this more efficiently and on the health of their employees? So are these things working? Most of the press has said these things have been hit or miss, a lot of failures in trying them, but you can see employers having a strong incentive to try to get this to work because they're spending a fortune on healthcare for their employees. If they can find cheaper ways to do it, I don't know if this is a solution because this isn't consumerism. Consumerism is the buyers and sellers are all brought together. This is still not the buyer. This is the employer. So you still got one level removed. So I'm going to skip through that one. That's just one more example of how we're trying to address this system. All right. This one we haven't hit yet, but this one's easy. So if you go down to other models, very close to the end. Consider lower cost models. So what about medical tourism? I don't know, have you ever heard that term before? Medical tourism? Does that sound like a strange term? So some come for treatment they cannot get at home. Others escape long waiting lists for public health. So what's the purpose of medical tourism? Three things. treatment they can't get at home, escape long waiting list, or high prices. Obviously, they're not trying to get high prices, but the escape. So I think that means escape long waiting list or escape. I'm going to put that in there. Escape high prices. Those are the three reasons people would go overseas to get their health care rather than getting it in the US. Consumers are incentivized to travel by substantial price differences. The average heart valve replacement costs 35,000 in Germany, or 30,000 euros versus 15,000 euros in Austria, with little or no drop in quality. A hip operation may have for 12,000 euros in Britain, 10,000 in Turkey, only 4,700 in Poland. And, in Europe, you're talking what, a $50 train ride to get there. It's not that expensive. Medical tourism is hampered by lack of detailed, reliable information on quality hospitals and clinics and their doctors and surgeons. Do you want to go to India and save 95% on your heart surgery if you don't know the quality of that particular provider? And obviously not. So that's going to be so you got to get data out there. So there are countries competing. So I spent a lot of time in Costa Rica. That's where we have a charity. Costa Rica is one of those countries that tries to compete for medical tourism. You'll see it on the list here. So you can see Costa Rica, they say dentistry, but Costa Rica is also for other things. It's interesting. We have a dentist office in Costa Rica. They charge adults $2 for a cleaning, and they charge children $1 for a cleaning. Is that less than what you pay here? Any of y'all pay more than $2 for a dental visit? So it's pretty inexpensive. But you can see the places around the world that are competing. Two newest online firms, both based in Berlin, hope to improve matters. They allow patients to search for medical treatments from a large selection of providers. There's another one someone could research. I don't know if it's in English or not, but there's just a lot of things you can do. Let's see how good their website is. Find the right doctor at home or abroad. It looks like it's still there. I don't see a date. So if one of you want us to research that would be interesting to me. It looks like it's in English. You have several other European languages. Offering clear information about pricing and the quality of staff and services. So we need more of that. So for consumerism to work, the consumer has to have data. They can't be at the mercy of the doctor. Otherwise, the consumer thinks spend more, get better care, when there's no relationship between those two. And because the key is for consumerism. Oh, we can put that up there. Where is consumerism? Key is information on quality and price. Without that, consumer only has one thing: price. And they assume, since all they have is price, that price is telling everything they need. But not only that, it may not be price, it might be deductible, in which case they don't shop at all. Deductible is the same no matter where they go. They just go wherever their doctor tells them to go. So for consumerism to work, this consumer needs to have pay for more of it, and they need information on quality. If all you do is make them pay more out of pocket, but they don't get information on quality, I don't think it fixes the process, because then the supply side has no incentive to improve the product. And so I like that. That there are firms out there that are trying to compete in this area. Gastric bypass. I was treated for heart defect. They got testimonials on here. I don't know if you can trust testimonials. Your personal patient manager, I don't know what that means. I'd hate to try these. I don't want to try it. I'll just, pretend, I need open heart surgery and put my name in there, no telling what you'll get afterwards. But interesting. I get excited when I see people trying to compete in this industry. Fewer American patients came than expected, partly because health insurers were not interested in sending people overseas. There's the other issue. How do you incentivize the health insurance company? If they're not going to pay for it, then why go overseas? So you got to change their incentives. Remember, we said at the beginning, who are the players and what their incentives? All right, questions on medical tourism? Might be fun. Take your family to Europe. You'll be in the hospital, for 5 days, but at least they're out having fun and you're saving money. If a lot of this is out of pocket, then the difference in cost could be enough to pay for the entire trip. Of course, that assumes you can fly on a plane when you're going over surgery and coming back from surgery. All right, this next article is some FYI on Affordable Care Act that I'm not that interested in. If you want to read through it, that's fine. There is one section of it that I think is important. And it's a little out of date, so um, I haven't seen an article recently how Affordable Care Act's going. We're going to hear pretty soon, aren't we? Because healthcare.gov is going to put out the rates for next year. There will be some articles on that. That'll be interesting. I did find an article saying that healthcare costs have not been spiraling the last few years, as we've seen, that they've somewhat flattened out. It's hard to give that credit to the Affordable Care Act because it started before the Affordable Care Act was passed. But I'm sure President Obama would probably want to take some credit for it. So it's certainly that maybe he contributed to it, keeping it down. But there has been some improvement. It's not that healthcare costs are going down. It's just that they're not rising as fast as they were. They're somewhat more sideways. But the end of this article on page 145, the law would work better with more people on the exchanges, especially healthy people. Already talked about that. Why do they want healthy people? Because they can overcharge them. Why do they want young people? Because they can overcharge them. That way, keep the costs down for everyone else. If I were a young person, I'd be complaining about this. The ideal way to achieve that would be to nudge Americans away from employer-provided health insurance. More than half Americans under 65 get their coverage through their job. Serves no good purpose. The culprit, this article is very much on my side of the bias. The culprit is a long-standing tax exemption for employer-provided healthcare benefits. This costs taxpayers about $250 billion a year and incentivizes employers to ramp up the health coverage rather than raise wages. It is better to abolish the deduction entirely. I'm going to bring this in. There's a couple places this goes. We were looking for this earlier in the first part under the problem. We talked about the tax code. So now we have the numbers. So that's good. We were looking for the numbers. So 250 billion, and I think this is a recent article, isn't it? I don't think it says old. Well, it might be a little dated. 7 years old. So 250, someone can research and see what it is. Now, and then the other place, so there's the problem is the tax code incentivizes extra spending, overspending. So what is the solution? Untie health insurance to the employer. Right. So just to remind you on the tax side, my idea was, you can word this however you want to. My idea is move away from deductions and move to credits. So if you want to, I'll give you my idea so you can ignore it, but eliminate the deduction and provide a means tested tax credit. So that's my approach. Why do I like that? First of all, the deduction. This subsidizes the rich. I don't think we need to subsidize the rich when we have a huge government deficit. This is skewed toward the poor and encourages 100% coverage. You remember why it encourages coverage, right? You get a tax credit to pay for health care or health insurance. If you don't use it, you lose it. So everybody would have an incentive to use the tax credit. It also eliminates pre-existing condition because everyone in the same boat. Remember, with underwriting can be waived if everybody's covered. The only time underwriting becomes a big issue if people get to choose. If you get to choose, what happens? Healthy people don't buy it. Unhealthy people do buy it, cost the price. And here, if you have a tax credit, let's say it goes to 60, 70% of Americans, there's no reason to do underwriting. You just do it based on age, and everybody's in the same boat. Because if you're healthy, you're still going to take it because it's your tax credit. If you don't use it, you don't get it. You're just throwing money away. So everybody's going to do it. Everybody understand what I'm pushing on the tax side? Now, do you have to push that? No, you don't have to. You could certainly do other things. I'm giving you somewhat. I probably shouldn't put my biases into the bullet, but something on should we change the tax code? So you're seeing my biases. You think about what you would like to do. Obviously, if you're a Medicare for all, everything's covered by taxes just through the Medicare tax. And I don't know what Bernie Sanders was saying the Medicare tax would go to, 10% or something. Who knows? It'd be pretty expensive. But he says that's not a big deal because all that healthcare you're getting provided by your employer just becomes part of your salary. But that's the math you'd have to look up and do some of the analysis on. And I think that is it. Can you believe it? 147 pages. Do you feel like you read 147 pages? All right, I want to jump over just real quickly to the class notes on page 42. So you may have to load that file, find the class notes. There's another outline. You might skim through it, but I want to hit a few points that we haven't really touched on yet. Y'all let me know when y'all are there. Y'all finding it? Any luck? Anybody has it? Yeah, a few of you. Okay. All right, so I'll go slowly. So if you're not there, you can catch up. So page 43, overdiagnosis. I think this is an interesting point. It wasn't until insurance was provided by employers that people started going to the doctor healthy. We think that's just normal, that people in 200 AD were going to the doctor when they're healthy, but they weren't. Because what could a doctor do? They could fix broken bones and that was about it. But now we have people going to the doctor all the time with no symptoms, no illnesses, just to see the doctor, see what's going on. The goal with that was to have earlier diagnosis. All right, this is what President Obama was talking about. This is what the second article is talking about. We should pay for doctor's visits, and the goal is to find stuff earlier. The problem with that, more diagnosis is not reducing death rates. You would think early diagnosis would reduce death rates, but it's not. So that gives you evidence early diagnosis is not a benefit. Often the treatment is worse than the thing being treated, but you tell someone they have cancer, they're going to do something, even though what you're doing to them would be worse. If you go for screening, 10% will find gallstones, 40% knee cartilage problems, 50% disc in the back. These are two things I want to avoid, is back surgery and knee surgery. Anytime my knee starts acting up, I just stop whatever I'm doing and don't do anything else. I do have a back injury, but it's gotten better. I don't want back. Y'all know people with back surgery. It's a pretty limiting thing. It's kind of tough on the body. But if you go in, they're going to find these things. So then now you got this question, do I have the surgery? If your knee was fine, I would say don't do anything, but listen to your doctors. We already talked about this, women mammography. I think you saw this in the video. Here's the point I was making about drugs. Lipitor helps 1 out of 100 people taking the medication, and it costs $1,500 a year. That's where AI and some other things can really help us to figure out who actually benefits from this. I love this quote. We saw that in the video. The surgery saved my life. Well, that's not data, that's anecdote, that's a story. You don't know if it saved a life. So antidote substitutes for good data. So all of this goes under overdiagnosis. We talked a little bit about preconditions, pre-hypertension, pre-diabetes. So we're catching things earlier. We're putting people on treatment because you don't have diabetes, but you have pre-diabetes. You don't have hypertension, but you have pre-hypertension. So let's put you on some medications, some special whatever. Well, if that was a good thing, then it should be reducing problems. But there's not any noticeable reduction in conditions themselves later on. The doctors are making more money, the pharmacies are making more money, but the patients are no healthier. So what a waste. But the experts keep saying we got to have these new thresholds. Why? Because they're overwhelmingly making money by doing so. The incentive again. So this is a great quote. I don't remember where I got it from, but the goal is not to find more cancers. The goal is to save more lives. So that's overdiagnosis. The goal is to find more stuff. Evidence-based medicine, the goal is to make people healthier. We saw this in the video. Medical errors are the third leading cause of death in the US. So have that under poor medical qualities. Under you can put this either under American lifestyles or under encourage people to be healthier, wherever you want to put it. I'm going to put it on the solution. First, healthier living. Diabetes could be cut in half by 10 to 15% reduction in weight, walking 30 minutes a day. Drugs reduce diabetes by 31%, exercise by 58%, and by 71% for those over 60 years old. And that's walking. It's not some intense workout. I do have a lot of friends over 60, over 70 that they're into the counting steps. I just don't know how much has improved their health or not. One friend of mine, when it's cold, she says she does 10,000 steps walking up and down her hallway with the TV blaring. So, that seems kind of boring, but she says she's sticking with it. She has a heart ailment that, obviously this would be important for her. So she has an incentive to stay healthy. But we talked about this earlier. Exercise is huge. But you kind of get the sense of the problem is how unhealthy Americans are. Weight and exercise is a huge issue, and drugs are effective, but not as effective as exercise. Yeah, again, on overdiagnosis, 15% of terminally ill men have prostate screening. Really no reason. I mean, it's possible you could save their life at 3 weeks of their life, but who would do surgery? Why even do the screening at all? All right, here we have on quality, inconsistent quality. Actually, there's two things here. So one survey of deaths from heart surgery range from 1% to 18% for different hospitals. So I'm not looking for much under difference in quality. It's inconsistent cost and quality. Just give me a few examples. It falls back into that consumerism part. This information, we got to get this to the consumer or we're not going to fix the problem. Oh, that was the wrong one. Sorry. I thought I copied it. I guess I didn't. Ah, why is it doing that? All right. Copy. Yeah, it won't let me paste it. I don't understand that. What am I doing wrong? Wow, that is really bizarre. Anybody know how I can get it to copy? Copy. 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 Please copy. Yeah. All right. Um, yeah. So one survey of deaths from heart surgery, 1% to 18%. And then the second one, I would put under solutions. See if it let me copy this. It probably won't, so I'll have to type it again. So I have information on quality, the spur process improvement. I like this quote. If I could get it to paste. Yeah, that one worked. So for some reason, it just doesn't like that one thing I'm copying and pasting. Reporting of data to the public caused almost immediate improvement, 41% reduction in deaths in 1 year in below average hospitals. Just providing information. It's not that the consumer changes as much as that the hospitals hate having such a horrible score, and they actually fix the obvious things. Pretty amazing. And so what do we do? Well, we don't do it because hospitals complain. Why do they complain? Hospitals make an additional $10,000 for each surgical complication. I'm going to jump back up. I would put that under inefficiency is encouraged. It's really bizarre that it's not letting me. Yeah, sorry. had more technical problems in this room, any room I've been in. So that's inefficiency because you get paid for inefficiency. I think the video said it best. One person's inefficiency is somebody else's revenue. I forget. I don't remember how she said it, but it was really quite well said. It may have been the guy who said it, but yeah, it's really, really interesting. All right, we're going to get into this with Porter, but let's look at their list here. So if you're picking a doctor or hospital, what measures would you want? The bounce back rate. Having to go back because of some complication. Average length of stay per treatment. Complication rate. Risk-adjusted mortality rate. So it's not just mortality rate, but how far along were you? How bad off were you? Never events, a sponge left in the patient, operate on the wrong patient, or the wrong side of the patient. We have had, there's stories of people having their leg amputated and they take the wrong leg. That's pretty scary, right? You think of someone with diabetes. Death following an elective surgery, that's awfully bad. Infection rate, that's a huge one. Safety culture surveys, this is what we're talking about, is asking nurses would they have a surgery in their hospital. That can be really, really great information to have. Volumes of treatment, we're going to talk a lot about that with Porter. He thinks volumes extremely important. We should concentrate volumes on more complicated surgeries in certain hospitals, even if people have to travel several hundred miles. There's certain operations, certain procedures where volume is key. Percentage of less invasive techniques. There's an interesting story on the Shah of Iran. None of you are old enough to remember that story, but you should look up why he died. Because the story that was told is he hired this doctor who had no experience with this particular condition, and there was a much newer, less invasive surgery they could have done, but his doctor didn't know about it, and his doctor ended up killing him. And obviously that didn't end well with the entire revolution. So yeah, if there's less invasive techniques, I've never had my appendix taken out, but I don't know if any of y'all have, but supposedly now, I mean, it's like a real simple, they just poke a little hole in you, and anybody know what I'm talking about? So I don't, maybe none of y'all had, but there's techniques that are far less invasive. Not only does it leave less scars in your body, but less likely to have infection, less likely to have complications. Is your hospital doing that? Or are they still 15 years ago kind of stuff? And then electronic records, open notes, video recording, all of those type of things. So we'll see another list when we get to Porter. Here's an issue of people, the impact insurance has on people. This is kind of the anti-consumerism here. A RAND study found that people with health insurance spend 50% more than those who pay out of pocket. People with insurance are 25% more likely to see a doctor, 33% more likely to see a hospital. So they must be healthier, right? They're going to the doctor, to go in the hospital more frequently. Actually, the RAND study found no apparent differences in most health outcomes for the two groups. That shows you we're wasting a lot of money. Maybe I didn't highlight this here. I have it somewhere in the notes. But this university wanted to do a study. There was a hospital convention or a doctor's convention. So a bunch of doctors left to go to the conventions, and the doctors remaining weren't as skilled. And so the university want to figure out how much worse were the treatments during the time in this convention, because obviously your best doctors are at the convention. And they discovered that the patients did better during the convention than outside of the convention. That's not a good sign. All right, this one, I don't know where you want to put this, probably on the quality. You can put this under quality or technology or something. So the use of videos to monitor doctors. One survey showed that before the video, 6.5% of surgeons washed their hands. After the video, 90% did. And you're still wondering about the 10%. You're like, I don't care. But which of these would you prefer? I remember when I had my surgery, I just one question, did you wash your hands? I asked my surgeon that. I'm sure it made him really mad. I was like, did you wash your hands? Yeah, of course it is. Like, yeah, I want to see you actually do it. All right. So, all right, that's it for the class notes. I want to cover a little bit in this article, this book. If you're really into this, I highly recommend their book. Especially, not only is it just really well written, it's got a lot of shocking data in it, but also their bibliography is just incredible. So I get to the point where I just wanted to read everything in the bibliography, but it was so massive. The bibliography is like a fifth of the book. Very well researched, very well documented. So if you're into this issue, their book is a great book and a great resource for other places you can go to find data. Um, so their big push. These are people from the Cato Institute. So obviously they're on the libertarian side, similar to your very first article we read. To make healthcare better and cheaper, we must change the way we pay for medical services. If and when when consumers take charge, the American healthcare system will quickly improve. Until then, it will not. That's a great quote to go under consumerism. I can't remember if I want to read the green or the, so. So here's what they say are the root causes. The two most central are intrusion of the political process and over-reliance on insurance. So they blame government and they blame insurance. Yep, we've heard that a lot, right? We're using too much insurance, too much insurance. The incentives that result from these fundamental errors render healthcare transactions opaque. These incentives enable and encourage providers to mistreat maintenance and overcharge consumers and taxpayers. Now here's an option. I don't know if y'all picked what your extra analysis is going to be, but they say Singapore is the model. So you might type Singapore in healthcare and see if that still gets good articles. They use mandatory and tax advantage personal savings accounts, which is one of the solutions we talked about, to which the government could add funds when necessary. Patients have control over how those dollars were spent, and funds become part of their estate if unspent. Moving in this direction would transform the incentives and send healthcare prices and quality in the wrong direction. So I'm not sure what that means, but so healthcare savings account, give patients control over the dollars. All right, so then they expand out their list. The 5 problems: politics, insurance, high prices, which they say are the result of those first 2, quality, and opaque prices. We've talked about all of those things. Political process, third-party payment. You can give some of their history here if you want to talk about insurance. Some their prices too high. They give some examples here. Quality, they just kind of mention it, and we talked about opaque prices. So that's their 5. So they have the 2 main causes and then the 5 big problems. 4 lessons that they've gotten from their work. They say people in the healthcare system are good people. They don't say they're all good people. You read their book, there's some definite villains in their book, beyond a doubt. But good people can't save a bad system where the incentives encourage bad acts. Wouldn't this be a great quote for that introductory section on the players? I wish I could bring some of these quotes in, but I can't copy and paste anymore, so you'll have to do it yourself. But that would be a great quote to lead in on the players in the system. We can rescue ourselves from the mess we have created by helping people buy medical goods and services and health insurance directly the same way they buy other goods. That's that consumerism. So incentives, consumerism. Providers may enjoy local monopoly, but beleaguered patients can disrupt this cozy cartel by traveling elsewhere. So shopping around against consumerism. Here he mentions that Indian hospital again. He also mentions Oklahoma City. And then less insurance. Insurers should pay for highly complex, expensive procedures that relatively few people need. Patients should pay for routine stuff. This is an interesting quote here. I'm not sure how accurate it is in the way they calculate, but one source reports that if all anti-poverty programs were replaced with a cash transfer, the current spending levels, a poor family of four would receive an annual income of nearly 70,000. So it gets back to that second article. A lot of economists believe this. There's a big debate. You might say Republicans don't want to spend on the poor. You can debate whether that's true or not, but the Democrats want to spend on the poor, but they don't want the poor to have any choice about it. So they want to dictate, it's that government mandate. So you can debate whether that's true, but essentially what economists are saying, just give the 70,000 to the poor and let them make the decisions and they'll spend it better. But some politicians say, no, they'll waste it on whatever, alcohol, drugs or whatever. But economists say, no, you give the money to the people, they'll make better economic decisions because it's their money. If you dictate what they can do with food stamps and Medicaid and those type of things, housing allowances, don't do all that, just give them 70,000. What do you think the poor would prefer? You think the poor would rather just have the cash? My guess is 98.7% would probably say, yes, give me the cash. There's some highlighted examples in here. There's some pretty shocking examples in here of some pharmaceuticals don't do well in this book. All right, so I talked about this earlier, but just to show you their point, this pharmacy argued that $84,000 for this drug was a good deal because it reduces the number of liver transplants and other expensive medical treatments infected people will need. But in competitive markets, antibiotics are priced on the basis of what it costs to make them, not in light of the benefits they yield. You don't buy stuff based on the benefit to you. You buy stuff based on the cost to the producer. That's what a competitive market is. Y'all remember economics class, marginal revenue equals, anybody remember? How long has it been since you've had microeconomics? Marginal revenue equals no takers. I know y'all had this. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. All right. In a competitive market, revenues are based not on the benefit to the consumer, it's based on the marginal cost to the producer. Competition pushes prices down to the producer's cost. There it is right there. And consumers enjoy the surplus. That is the difference between actual price and highest price. So yeah, it may be worth $84,000 to the patient, but if you can give it to him for $1,000, the competitive markets is giving him $83,000 in benefit. And that's the advantage of a competitive environment. Pharmacies are saying, no, we're going to charge what the total amount the patient's willing to bear, regardless of our costs. And that is not a competitive market. This falls really well under consumerism. About half the most transformative drugs invented the last 25 years had their origins in research that was supported by public funds. Bernie Sanders just has he has a really interesting proposal on patents and patent protections. I think this book talks about it. They actually were somewhat, even though they're libertarians, they're somewhat favorable on that particular proposal. I don't think you'd want to put this in the paper, but could you change the patent system for drugs in a way that would be more beneficial overall? And that's what they're arguing here. Research shows that a medication's price has no relationship to how well it works. $1 million contribution from a pharmaceutical company to a copay charity can keep hundreds of patients from abandoning newly priced drugs, enabling the donor to collect millions from Medicare. This is kind of the cynicism of this is pharmacies look so charitable. They're donating money to help people buy their drug, but what happens with the money they donate? It comes right back to them from Medicaid to buy their drug. They're essentially donating money to themselves so many people can buy their drug. It's quite a racket. All right, so here's here's some examples about the incentives in pharmacies. This pharmacy sold a 2,300 dose, 38 times as much as the other 6 randomized clinical trials. 38, look at that, 38 times as much as the other, found that Avastin and Lucentis are largely equivalent. Why do so many eye doctors price the more expensive one? Because Medicare pays physicians a lot more for using that drug. If you're wondering why Medicare does not simply pay the same amount, the answer is that the law prevents government from doing either. So we'll see, you know, some of you want to research this latest law that Congress passed to allow Congress to negotiate. Maybe that's changing that, but that's a pretty messed up incentive. This creates a large incentive for cardiologists to implant stents. I talk about stents. Reading this book makes me think, you know, I don't ever want a stent in my life, even when they are not necessary. 2 out of 3 elective stents or more than 200,000 procedures a year are unnecessary. Stents confer no benefit. The patients who receive stents weren't less likely to die or suffer non-fatal heart attacks, unplanned, whatever, compared to those who only took medication. The financial costs of implementing stents and hundreds of thousands of patients who don't need them runs $2.4 billion a year. That's just for the stents. To calculate the total cost, you'd have to add the millions upon millions of dollars spent on blood thinners and medical monitoring. That's inefficiency is encouraged. That works pretty well there. I'm not going to try to copy and paste anymore. I'm not trying to, you know, I'm not giving y'all medical advice. Reading this book, though, just, it's like there's certain terms. If my doctor says, I'm going to be saying, I want a second opinion, I want a third, I want a 10th opinion. And I want someone giving me advice that has no financial incentive in this transaction. 2 doctors perform unnecessarily but highly profitable cardiac procedures on 750 patients. The surgeries were thought to have killed at least 94 patients that caused many others to suffer strokes. So there are some evil, bad players, people doing surgery that were unnecessary. I don't mean it was questionable. You know, some doctors say yes, some no. This was, I mean, there's stories in this book of doctors operating on patients who did not have cancer to give them cancer surgery just so they could charge them for this surgery. The researchers hypothesized that mortality would be higher. Oh, here it is. Here's the story I was telling you. I forgot where it was from. All right, so the researchers thought mortality would be higher during the cardiology meeting dates, and the differences in outcomes would be largest in teaching hospitals where a disproportionately larger fraction of cardiologists may attend. To their surprise, patients suffering from heart failure or cardiac arrest who showed up at major teaching hospitals while the conventions were underway fared better than those who came on other days. High-risk patients fared better when doctors at teaching hospitals were off at meetings because they received less care. That's a scary statement, isn't it?
That's long-term.
I don't know how far out the researchers did. I mean, that sounds like a pretty comprehensive project to undertake. That's why I love, you know, I even got the page numbers here. There will be a footnote with the actual study. So if you're interested, get the book. It's not an expensive book. It's not a textbook. It's probably a $15, $20 book. Really well written and researched. All right, so here's more inefficiency encouraged. They came up with 100 milligram vials, and a septic treatment protocol was to give dialysis in a patient an entire vial once or twice a month. This produced 0 waste. They didn't do that. They gave 25 milligram doses more frequently because the drug gave only 100 vials, right? So the patient needs 100. They're prescribing though 25. They're sending out 100. So they're using 25 and throwing 75 away. Does that sound intelligent to anyone in here? Then they billed Medicare for the full sales of the 100. The more they wasted, the more money they made. That just seems incredible, doesn't it? So someone complained and contended that they stopped wasting. Under new laws, Medicare paid the clinics a flat rate of $230 per treatment. According to whistleblowers, they quickly switched from $425 to $100. So you see incentives pretty much on display there, right? You see what they're doing. Can you blame them? I think in this case, yeah, you can. I think someone at the company has to say, hey guys, this is wrong. This is evil. Stop doing it. It's kind of like me with the mortgage bank. It's like, come on, guys, someone's got to step up and say this is unethical. Yeah, this is real similar to quote from the video. A big problem with the system that it pays providers well for doing things that don't actually help patients. How do you change that? Back surgery, no better than non-surgical treatment, yet doctors perform 600,000 of them, despite studies showing that arthroscopic surgery to correct that knee problem is no better than sham surgery. It's much more expensive and invasive than physical therapy. Doctors perform the procedures 500,000 times. Lots of men die with prostate cancer. Relatively few die of prostate cancer. The screening results in small to no reduction in prostate cancer mortality and associated with harms. So I got a lot of overdiagnosis in this section. This is page 10 of this article, of this book. 10 trials involve 600,000 women, so no evidence suggesting effective mammography screening on overall mortality. The problem is that early, less reliable studies spawn whole industries. And this is part of what this book says is there's an early study. It shows there's a benefit. Everybody starts doing it. And then a later study says, no, that study was flawed. But everybody's already got their hands in the till and no one wants to change what they're doing. It's just self-fulfilling kind of thing. So years later, when better research reverses the initial study, shutting down the industry is hard because so many providers depend on it for their livelihood. There's so much here for overdiagnosis. Only a fraction of what physicians do is based on solid evidence from our grade 8 randomized control trial. I wish I had a better graph, but I would put this graph in your paper, figure 6.1. So I think the beneficial starts right here at 11%. So on the studies, 11% beneficial, 24% likely to be beneficial, 7% there's a trade-off between benefit and harm, 5% unlikely to be beneficial, 3% likely to be ineffective or harmful, 50% we don't know. Now, if I were you, I would just recreate this in PowerPoint and put it in your paper to make it pretty, right? You could redo this whole thing, be pretty easy to build. That is a scary and very similar to the video, wasn't it? The guy just said, hey, we don't have any evidence. It's not that it's right or wrong, it's we just do not know. More mammograms. Yeah, we talked about this. If you suggest women in their 40s not have this test, people come out and say you're going to kill people. That's horrific. Boy, I don't know where this belongs. I would probably put this under, maybe not. Maybe it belongs on the fraud. Maybe under the players and incentives. I don't know. You got government, you got pharma under the players and incentives, but pharma's donated $3.3 billion to congressional campaigns, 43% more than the second largest industry. Hospital and nursing homes contributed 1.4 billion. Physicians contribute 1.2 billion. They contribute $735,000 per legislator per year. This book talks about there was a law passed that was going to prevent hospitals from doing something. And the hospitals complained. So what Congress did is they said, well, we'll delay it 1 year. And then Congress got really smart and he said, well, we got all this money because we delayed it 1 year. Let's not undo the bill. Let's just every year keep delaying it 1 year. And guess what happens when you do that? You get some massive contributions. That's pretty smart on legislature side, right? It's like, oh, we'll delay it 1 more year. Yeah, thanks for the contributions. We really appreciate it. Yeah, that's right here. All right, so overdiagnosis, unnecessary medical care accounts up to 30% of what is spent on healthcare. With total spending now north of 3 trillion, this means Americans waste 1 trillion on healthcare in just 1 year. That's 400 billion more than US spends on national defense. We could reduce medical spending by 50% without doing damage to our collective health. Health policy experts know that we see at best only weak aggregate relationships between health and medicine, in contrast to apparently stronger relationship between health and many other factors such as exercise, diet, sleep, smoking, pollution, climate. This sounds very much like that second article, doesn't it? The 100 and whatever, the $1.83 million. Cutting half of medical spending would seem to cost little on health. It would free up vast resources for other health and utility gains. Do you need a final quote to get off your paper? That might be a powerful one to put at the very, very end. That's a pretty powerful statement, isn't it? Almost 100 seniors a day, that seems unbelievable, a day die from medical procedures they didn't need and shouldn't have received. Yeah, here's the guy I was talking about. He told healthy patients they had cancer, so he could give them chemotherapy. He gave one of his patients 155 chemo treatments over 2.5 years, even though the patient was cancer-free. That's not one of the good people in the system he was talking about. 2 plastic surgeons charged more than $250,000 to sew up her incision, a task done by a resident during her previous operation. Yeah, surprise bills. Here's on this page. Oh, I didn't put page numbers on this page. So page 17, there's a good quote on surprise bills. Surprise bills are a consequence of a lack of market competition. No other industry could get away with that if the patient knew what was going on. I'm just going to hit the green. All right, so why doesn't Medicare and Medicaid fix this? Their argument here is volume. Medicare and Medicaid receive something like 3 billion claims per year. For a human being to spend 5 minutes reviewing each claim require 125,000 people working 2,000 hours a year. It's just, he's arguing now. I've had people say, you know, there's an automated system. The system itself is checking. There's AI and those kind of things. So hopefully that's going on. The computers are doing a lot of this work. But still, the volumes are just massive. 3 billion claims per year. That's a lot to be able to find fraud and to fix the system. Inefficiency is encouraged. Healthcare providers that harm patients can make more money by doing so. They get paid once for delivering services that injure patients and a second time for treating their injuries they inflict. This may explain why healthcare providers harm patients so often. I should have checked that y'all got this article. Y'all have this up, this Word document up. Forgot to ask y'all that. So that fix under inefficiency is encouraged because you make more money off of it. Obviously, it'd be really efficient if you didn't injure the patient. You only saw them once. That'd be far more productive, but you cut your income in half. All right, this goes on their quality. Researchers found that patients at the worst hospitals were 3 times more likely to die and 13 times more likely to have medical complications than if they visited one of the best hospitals. It seems likely the few hospitals know where they stand. They simply can't make money by measuring or improving quality. So you can put that under the problem. Quality differences are under the solution. We got to get data out there. We don't. Y'all might flip through on this. All right. I think this is really important. We'll probably have to get the porter on Thursday. Sorry, I keep thinking we're going to finally finish, but there's so much really interesting stuff here. A typical one-earner couple can expect to receive Medicare benefits worth $427,000. after paying 70,000 in taxes, and Medicare premiums, a two earner couple fares slightly worse. They get 427,000 in benefits for a price of 102. Part B premiums now cover only 25% of spending on physician services. The 75% is untaxed gift to the program beneficiaries paid out of general tax revenues. When you see on Facebook senior citizens talking about we shouldn't have to pay property tax, Medicare premiums are too high, then just copy and paste this and respond to them. Hey, grandma, I just saw this and I don't think there is a generational warfare that's going to be happening in the next 20 years where you guys are grossly overcharged in order to compensate your grandparents. And who's going to win that battle? Your grandparents are. There's more of them and they vote. So you guys, I don't know whom are y'all going to saddle all these costs with? We're running out of people, right? So y'all need to have like 60 times more kids and you can saddle it all on them because we're running out of taxpayers to pay for all this stuff. So what would your grandmother say? I'm just a poor, sweet little lady. You know, I'm so, but grandma, you have a 3,500 square foot house. You drive 2 Cadillacs. You know, I don't think senior citizens realize how much wealthier they are than the young people. Not all of them. Obviously, there's poor senior citizens. But as a group, senior citizens are far wealthier than the people that are subsidizing them. All right, so if you're going, I'm not going to read through this, but if you're going to propose Medicare for all, I do want you to read this here on page 23. How efficient is Medicare? Is it really that efficient? And they have some data that one thing you have to be careful of with Medicare, it talks about their costs. They're talking about their direct costs, but the federal government, there's other entities that are incurring costs for the system. I mean, you think about it, it's kind of a cool system where the IRS collects all their premiums for them for free. That's kind of a nice little system. It'd be nice if health insurance companies could have that too, right? So they have a lot of members. So they give you some interesting numbers here. It's not quite as efficient as you may think. They're not real big on Medicare for all. History provides no basis for believing the government ever improve quality, reduce spending, or get fraud, waste, or abuse under control. Medicare and for all's proponents persist in thinking the government will magically run an enormous single-payer system better than has run any other healthcare program before. The U.S. government appears to be unusually subject to pressure from special interests and uniquely incapable of rationing. My biggest issue with government is innovation. I don't think governments have an incentive to innovate. I don't think government employees have an incentive to make things more efficient. I think competition gives you a better answer, but there are people who believe healthcare is different. I've heard the same thing with education. Healthcare and education are different. Competition doesn't work. You can make that argument, but make sure you address some of these issues here where the system is essentially bankrupt. Medicare is essentially bankrupt. Probably more bankrupt than the entire U.S. debt right now. Medicare by itself is probably more bankrupt if you did the present value of all of its future promises versus future revenues and taxes. We talk about this technology being part of the problem. Why did LASIK and cosmetics procedures become more affordable? First party payments, so the consumers were paying for it, competition. By comparison, LASIK and cosmetic surgery became cheaper. The prices of medical services covered by insurers rose at 3 times the rate of inflation. We've seen similar quotes to that. Retail clinics provide less costly treatment than physician offices with no apparent adverse effect on quality, and they cost about 80% less. I've used some of those clinics. They certainly seem more efficient. You walk in, there's no one there. There's just a kiosk. You sign in, and 5 minutes later, you're talking to the doctor, and 20 minutes later, you're out with whatever you need. Maybe they're more efficient. All right, here's some more examples of medical tourism. So that's on page 26. A kidney transplant, 150 at home, but 25,000 in Philippines. They give you the mortality rate. So somehow copy and paste that. Wish I could copy and paste. If I could, I would bring that over. So this, I would put this under the medical tourism side. Y'all got it? New York Times reports Smart Shopper gives workers a list of providers in their network and rates based on quality. There's another one you could research, Smart Shopper. So it then provides cash incentives to use lower cost providers wanting to gain their business. Local providers who know that employees share in discounts may advertise their willingness. So I love this idea. I went on their site and they weren't doing anything in San Antonio when I went on their site. So I couldn't see if, hey, I mean, that'd be interesting. If you go to this doctor, they'll pay you $50. That sounds like a pretty good deal. What I think is interesting is what's their business model. So you might go and look for them and they've gone out of business because they don't have a good business model. But it's interesting. I'm assuming they're getting payments from insurance companies because they're pushing people to cheaper places. I would assume that's their model. But I love that. That's a great concept. The United States accounts for 40% of pharma companies' revenues, even though we're only 4 to 5% of the world's population. There is a debate that U.S. consumers are subsidizing the rest of the world on pharma. Fraud. If you want something on fraud, here's something on fraud. It's that first part of the problem. It's only when someone else is paying the freight that consumers toss their medical bills in the trash without reviewing them. Why is fraud so easy? Because the people paying for it aren't the ones using the service. They say fraud is $1 trillion a year. So why do they want you on healthcare.gov? The actual cost ratio. So Obamacare, Affordable Care Act prohibits insurance from charging sick people more, from denying coverage on pre-existing, and from charging other people more. They can only do it 3 times more. What should the ratio be? The actual cost ratio is more like 6 to 1. So who's winning and who's losing? So everybody's winning, right? Seniors pay half as much. Well, that means you as a young person are paying twice as much. Why don't you complain? Because you're paying 2,000 instead of 1,000, whatever. And with the senior citizens, it's a much higher number. Rates for people 18 to 24 having had to increase 45% above their actual rate. Do y'all realize y'all getting ripped off? Do you realize you're paying 45% too much? Can you imagine if that were the case? And wouldn't you like that in auto insurance? They overcharge 40-year-old drivers so that they would cut your rate 50%. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't you love that? Shouldn't we have a law that says you can't charge young drivers more than 50%? How was mandating a price break on health insurance for this far higher income group? Remember, the subsidies going to the wealthy and it's being paid for by the poor. Not a good system. The guy who was pushing this said, make sure the young people don't know this because they'll complain and the bill will not get passed. So his goal was no transparency. Don't let anybody know what this bill is actually saying. Lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. Basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter. But basically, this is what really, really critical for getting this thing to pass. Where do you put that on my outline? This is not a politician. This is a consultant to the politician. He said, make sure young people don't know they're getting grossly overcharged because we'll never get this thing passed. So do y'all feel like patsies at all? Funnels resources from the less well-off to the more well-off. That's why Obamacare had a visual mandate coupled with a tax penalty. Cross subsidies are hard to maintain when people can avoid them. But yeah, if you don't have to buy it, you just don't buy it because it's grossly overcharged. I think that's about it. One last thing. Well, yeah, some more about overdiagnosis. It found even though people who were treated for free used more medical treatments, their health effectively was the same as people who had to pay. Giving away healthcare for free has enormous downsides. Encourage people to use treatments that are ineffective, harmful, wasteful. To make medical treatments free also diverts enormous amounts of money from the public health priorities. So more of this maybe goes under inefficiencies encouraged, but When they say healthcare for free, they're talking about employer-provided health insurance or Medicaid. Probably Medicare is in their solution as well. When hundreds of million people spend their own money on healthcare, they will behave differently, and healthcare providers will too. There goes consumerism. Good quote for consumerism. All right, sorry, we still got one more thing to do. So I promise you only one more thing to go, and that's the porters. We'll do porters pretty quickly. The good news is if I get too far behind, I'm cutting out the accounting, which is the most boring part of the class anyways. So anyone really upset, anyone crying tears because we're not going to do insurance accounting, we'll cover it real quickly, but not in the detail. All right, I'll stop it there. All right, so I want to finish up the very bottom of the rubric, which is the second to last thing, which is Michael Porter, the same famous Michael Porter of value chain management, Porter's 5 forces. So he's got his hands in quite a few things. This is an older article. He has more recent ones. They're just not put together as well as this article, and they don't say anything new. So this article still, the arguments are still timely. And I'll go with an older article if it's better written than a newer article anytime, because it's the concepts that are the most important. So it's a pretty bold title though, isn't it? The strategy that could fix healthcare, the strategy that will fix healthcare. So what is his argument and what are the pieces? Essentially, you get full credit if you do a decent summary of this article for that section of it. All right. Don't go overkill, because you could write a really long paper, but don't go underkill either with 2 sentences. So he has a list of things that he does. You want to put that list in there. So let's walk through the highlighted part, and you really can, you could read the entire thing. You could get away with just reading the highlighted, but it's not that long of an article. Around the world, every healthcare system is struggling. I try to show you that by showing the UK's and its problems very similar to US. It's time for a new strategy at its core. So here it is at its core, maximizing value for patients. We've talked about that. What is value? So remember, value is not health outcomes. The value has 2 pieces. Y'all remember what those are? Outcomes, and what was the second piece? Cost. You have to have both of those in there. If you only look at outcomes, you end up with a system no one can afford. But if you don't look at outcomes, you have a system which is focused on treatment and over-treatment, over-diagnosis. So it's on outcomes. Now, he's going to tell you how we define outcomes, how that's measured. We must move away from supply-driven healthcare around what physicians do and toward patient-centered, organized around what patients need. So that's another way of talking about the outcomes. We must shift from volume and profitability, such as physicians' visits, hospitalizations, procedures, tests, to patient outcomes achieved. Right? So it sounds good. Change the focus from the suppliers to the demanders. Must replace today's fragmented. This is another big deal with him. We got to get rid of this fragmented system. We can't have everybody doing all this stuff all over the place. We need to have a somehow controlled system. So he doesn't want local providers providing all services. We need to concentrate certain services and certain providers. So he wants to be concentrated in health delivery organizations in the right locations to deliver high value care. So that's another good way of summarizing it. So what exactly is he going to restructure? How it's organized, how it's measured, and how it's reimbursed. Measurement's a big part of this. This is the debate. I have several UT health science students in my executive MBA class. They complain about this. These surveys that everybody's doing, they say the people asking the survey don't understand our business. So it's not easy. Just saying we're going to measure this is not easy, because they complain, they have a technical understanding. And you might say, well, they're incentivized incorrectly. There may be some of that, but they also know what they're talking about. So there's a mix of how do you get this exactly right? And their argument is we don't think they're there yet. So it's not easy, probably not as easy as he's gonna imply here. So there's the pieces right there. You might put this into your paper. So it's got actually six components. One is a base underlying all of it, which is the IT part of it. He calls them integrated practice units. That's that concentration. Measure outcomes and cost for every patient. Move to bundle payments and care cycles. So rather than you going to this specialist for this to this, you have one system that's taking care of everything for you, and they decide how you're dispersed. Integrate care delivery across separate facilities, very similar, 3 and 4, very similar. And then excellence, measure quality. We got to have quality at the same time. And how do you keep all of this information? You have to have an IT platform. And then he makes it real complicated by having these arrows going all over the place. I'm not a big fan of these type of formats with the arrows going everywhere. They don't always, I'm like, what point is he making? I guess the word integrated is all these pieces have to be talking to each other, but there are some that are so overlapping that it's a little hard to know exactly what he means. All right. So he says, what's the problem with the old strategy? He says the goals were narrow, focus on access to care. That was the Affordable Care Act's problem. I'm not as negative on the Affordable Care as some people. My mom, I can't remember if I told you all this story, but she sent a YouTube video, just scathing review of Affordable Care Act. And so I watched it and I go, she sent it to everybody she knew. So I emailed back to her, not everybody. I'm not those reply to all. It's like, Mom, it's a really interesting video. Unfortunately, half of what it says is not even true. If they give you a page number in the Affordable Care Act that says this, I would go to that page number, nothing. So they were making stuff up. So whoever did, it was very professionally done. It looked like a documentary, but the data was just wrong. So my mom had to send an apology. And so my negative on the Affordable Care Act is it's fixing the problem of access before it fixes the problem of bad incentives on the supply side. Now, maybe you have to do both at the same time. Maybe this is like, I don't know, trying to fix a plane while it's flying kind of thing. But which comes first, fixing the system or getting people more access? Obviously, uninsured Americans is a big issue, but if we're going to insure them and push them into a really badly incentivized system, that may not work. So access, he says, that's not the goal. Containing costs and boosting profits have been a distraction. Containing costs ignores the value to the customer. So this is too focused, supplier focused. Access to poor care is not the objective. That's kind of I had the same issue on free college tuition. We got to fix the colleges before we give 1 million people free access to colleges. Nor is reducing costs at the expense of quality. Increasing profits is today misaligned with the interests of the patients because profits depend on increasing volumes, not on delivering good results. In healthcare, the overarching goal for providers, as well as every other stakeholder, must be improving value. How many times does he use the word value in here? Where value is defined as, again, can you guess? What matters to the patient and the cost. So make sure that's in your answer. If you don't say value has those two components, then you're missing his entire point. Moving away from fee-for-service toward performance-based reimbursement. This is the part I think, to me, is the most challenging because I do think those measurements are tough, but you got to measure what's important and then you compensate that. What do y'all know? As soon as you start doing a measurement at a corporation, what happens? Do the employees change their behavior to make the firm better, or do they change their behavior so that they get good scores and get more pay, whether it improves the company or not, right? So you manage to the statistics, not to the improvement is trying to achieve. So that's the big problem with metrics. And it's funny on ease of doing business, the World Bank had to get rid of that because Russia they figured out how to move up on the list without fixing anything. And why? Because they knew the statistics that were being measured, so they fixed those statistics. So they had to do away with the entire measure. So I think it's tough because we're not measuring something that's simple here. We're measuring something that's pretty complex. So I think that's the biggest problem while he's talking about it. I love the concept, These pressures are leading more independent hospitals to join healthcare systems, more physicians to move out of private practice, become salaried employees. That's part of what he wants. He wants more concentration. He wants like this massive corporate healthcare system that coordinates everything and gets paid for its outcomes. The strategic agenda for moving to a high-value healthcare delivery system comprises of these 6 components, organizing around the patient's medical condition rather than physician's specialty, measuring costs and outcomes for every patient, developing bundled prices, integrating care across separate facilities, expanding geographic reach. So this is the same thing as that chart, but with a little few more words to it. All right, so here in the paper, I may not go through all of this. Here he's going to go through each one of these. And I do think on a couple of these, I have trouble distinguishing if they're really 2 different things. So I think some of them to me seem a little overlapping. So is this concept of IPUs? I'm not sure that's his own term because I haven't seen that other places. So how are clinicians, doctors, hospitals organized to deliver care? They should be organized around the customer. Who's the customer right now? Insurance companies, employers. Here he means around the patient. I'm actually surprised he didn't use the word patient there. That requires a shift from today's siloed organization by specialty and discrete service to organize around a patient's medical condition. We call such structure integrated practice units, team made up of both clinical and non-clinical personnel, provides a full care cycle for the patient's condition. So he's expanding this outside of just doctors and hospitals. It could be dietitians, it could be exercise, it could be whatever you need. IPUs not only provide treatment, but also assume responsibility for engaging patients and their families in care. Do you think the healthcare system wants that responsibility? This is really changing their scope. Providing education and counseling, encourage and adherence to treatment and prevention protocols. What if a medical system is paid more if their patients take their medicine when they should? They're paid more if the patient goes to rehabilitation. They're paid more. You know, the doctor is going to say, hey, that's not my problem. I told him what to do. It's like, no, you're now responsible to make sure he takes his pills. You're now responsible. You get paid if you can find a way to get that to happen. In this one, supporting needed behavioral changes. Do you think the healthcare system wants to be responsible for how many people quit smoking in their geographic area? The personnel work together regularly as a team. You saw a little bit of that in the video. I meant to count how many people were in that room, but it was more than 10, probably closer to 15 to 20. A common goal, maximizing the patient's overall outcomes. And so what he's saying is you somehow have to give them the incentive to do that. If they accomplish that, they get paid more. You don't just tell them, hey, you got to do it right. You know, you get paid more if we accomplish this. So everybody in the team can say, how do we get Mary back to work earlier with less pain, with few complications at a lower cost? Everybody's in the room saying, how can we do that? That would be pretty incredible, wouldn't it? So he gives some examples. So you might, you know, in the other analysis, look at some of these. So he talks about the Virginia Mason Medical Center. He gives a couple other examples in here as well. The impact on value. So remember, value is the 2 things. And essentially what he's going to argue, if you go to this strategy, you increase the numerator and you reduce the denominator. You get better quality outcomes to the patients and it costs less. You heard that on the video though, didn't you? We have better outcomes and it costs less. And oh, by the way, our revenue goes down because if our costs go down, our revenues go down. So at Virginia Mason, their patients miss fewer days of work, 4.3 versus 9, and need fewer physical therapy visits, half as many. They use MRI scans to evaluate low back pains, has decreased by 23%, and it's lowered costs. They've also increased revenue through increased productivity rather than depending on more fee-for-service visits. From unneeded or duplicate tests and cares, the clinic sees about 2,300 new patients a year compared to 1,400 in under the old system. So Stuff that I take in my class, are they focused on turnover or margin? It's the turnover strategy, right? Their revenue per customer is going to be less. We can have a lot more. So are they Costco or are they Tiffany's? This is the Costco approach, right? It's do a lot more for a lot less, and you have just as good of outcomes. IPUs exist with similar results, faster treatment. Why faster treatments? Because they're more productive. They're not doing unnecessary tests. They're not doing unnecessary treatment. Better outcomes, lower costs, improved market share in the condition. Obviously, if they're getting 2,300 new patients instead of 1,400, they're growing their book of business, even though each patient might be less cost because they're not doing as many tests. All right, that's number one. You'll see IPUs. You saw a little bit of that in the video. Okay, measurement. Measuring results, a familiar principle in management. You can't manage what you don't measure. Y'all probably heard that in your management class, right? Teams improve and excel by tracking progress over time and comparing their performance to that of their peers. Rigorous measurement of value, outcomes, and costs. He says that as many times as I'm going to say it. Is perhaps the single most important step to improving healthcare. The only true measure of quality are outcomes that matter to patients. When those outcomes are collected and reported publicly, we talked about this before, providers face tremendous pressure and incentives to improve, to adopt best practices. So it's good measurement. It's got to be communicated to the public. And all of that creates this kind of virtuous cycle of improvement. All right, so what matters? So I love this table. You could probably just use this table. So what matters? Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, health status achieved. Obviously, if the patient dies, that's not a good outcome. So mortality rates. Functional level achieved. What are they able to do once they leave? Pain level achieved. Extent of return to physical activities, ability to return to work. Y'all disagree with any of that list as a patient? Probably the first one you agree with. The others I would agree with. I don't like pain. I'd rather get back to work than sitting home in a bed. That may sound good if you're a coal miner, but for most of us, that gets pretty boring pretty fast. All right, y'all see the first level is survival and recovery. The second one is the actual process. Time to recovery, time to begin treatment. So how long do you have to wait? Time to return to your physical activities, time to return to work. And this utility of care or treatment process. Diagnosis, errors, ineffective care, treatment, discomfort, complications, those kind of just, someone made a mistake and you paid as a patient. Delays, anxiety, pain, length of hospital stay, infections, pulmonary embolism, which I'm not sure exactly what that is. So these others, I'm not sure what they are, but need for reoperation, delirium, those things that if the hospital reduces error rate, you wouldn't have to go through that. Remember, in the current system, if they do this stuff, they make more money. A lot of those things. A lot of those things are revenue to the hospital. He's saying now you're actually going to be penalized as a hospital because those things. All right, so that's the process. You actually at the hospital going through the process or trying to get to the hospital. And then the last one's after the treatment. After you go home, should the hospital have responsibility for how you survive? And the hospital might say, hey, if they put on weight or if they're not exercising, that's not our problem. And now he's saying, yeah, that is your problem. You're now responsible for their health. Sustainability, maintain functional level, ability to live independently, need for revision or replacement, loss and consequences of the therapy, loss of mobility due to inactive rehabilitation, inadequate rehabilitation, risk complex fractures, susceptibility to infections, stiff knee due to unrecognized complication. So this is after your treatment, you're at home. Does it stick? Does it stay with it? Does it actually continue for the rest of your life or for however long they're looking? So he talks about that here. Tier 1 involves status achieved. Tier 2 involves nature of the care while you're there. 3 is outcomes related to sustainability of health. So hip replacements, I think, I may have said this earlier, but just an amazing, amazing thing. It seems like such a complicated. There's a lady here at it, and boy, she was back at work just a few days later and was walking around pretty well. It seems pretty amazing, but they're not all the same. Not all hospitals have the same success rate. So a hip replacement lasts 2 years is inferior to one lasts 15 years from both the patient's perspective and the providers. Tier 1 functional outcomes improve, costs go down. Tier 2 or Tier 3 improve, costs invariably go down. So if a hospital, you notice he's saying costs. So for a hospital, costs and revenues are highly related. When costs go up, the revenues go up because they charge essentially whatever they're doing. But if a hospital does this better for the patient, the cost of the system goes down. So how do we incentivize the hospital to do that when this will also cause their revenues to go down? That means you've got to pay them differently. By failing to consistently measure outcomes, we lose perhaps the most powerful lever of cost reduction. All right, what about costs? For a field in which high cost is an overarching problem, the absence of accurate cost information in healthcare is nothing short of astounding. Few clinicians have any knowledge of what each component of care costs, much less how costs relate. So you saw his measurement of outcomes. You get the impression the measurement of cost is even more difficult. Most hospital cost accounting systems are department-based, not patient-based. That's a pretty important concept. And designed for billing transactions. They're not designed for billing outcomes. I mean, how many of you seen a bill that says patient improved $2,000? No, they have all this stuff like a contraction helps you put your socks on. Like, I don't need that. Determined value, providers must measure costs at the medical condition level, tracking the expenses involved in treating condition over the first full cycle of care. This requires understanding the resources used in a patient's care, the personnel, the equipment, the facilities, the capacity costs of supplying each resource, the support costs associated with care, IT administration, then the cost of caring for the condition can be compared. This is pretty tough to do. He obviously knows this. I remember when activity-based costing first came out, the accountants were going to solve all the world's problems. And 20 years later, it's a mess because it's really, really tough to do. A lot of these costs are kind of one person's kind of involved in multiple things. And you ask them what percentage of your time you're doing that. And I had to do that at USAA. What percentage of time you worked on this fund? It's like, well, I work on this that impacts all funds. You know, it's tough. So it's not that easy to do. Doctors, surgeons, nurses may be a little more straightforward because their time really is probably as specifically associated with patients most of the time. But IT, administration, how are you going to put people at the front desk and associate their time to this kind of stuff? It's going to be tough. So activity-based costing, maybe. I would agree with them. They can get better. So you can definitely get better because you change the incentive, but it's not going to be easy. Providers are achieving savings of 25% or more by tapping opportunities such as better capacity utilization, more standardized processes, better matching of personnel skills to tasks, locating care in the most cost-effective type of facility, and many others. So how do you get your costs down? He gives some good examples here. Virginia Mason found that it costs $4 per minute for an orthopedic surgeon or other procedural specialist to perform a service, $2 for general internist, and $1 for a nurse practitioner. And a lot of those cost differences, focusing the time on the most expensive staff members on work that utilize their full skill set. That seems obvious, right? Don't have I think we saw that one example of, of a physician rolling someone in a wheelchair. It's like, no, we don't need you doing that. We can have someone else do that. Nurse practitioners, physical therapists, these are very trained people. They know what they're doing. They may not be able to do surgery, but they can do a lot of things that you don't need a doctor doing. But it takes the hospital saying, let's assess who's doing what and let's change those procedures. I think that's great. I don't know how many of y'all saw Tim Hendren Wednesday night. Were you there? The guy from Santigos. I mean, I love what he talked about how he looked at costs and also personnel, so that they went cashless. And I think, man, that's terrible. Go cashless for a movie theater. You remember why he went cashless? He had these managers that were up there till 4 a.m. counting cash. It's like, I don't want you counting cash. I want you taking care of the employee and taking care of the customer. That's pretty good management, isn't it? Isn't that what the way you want a hospital to think? This person shouldn't be counting cash. This is a manager. We're paying them $40,000, $50,000 a year. I want the customer happy. I want the employee happy. If he's mopping floors or she's mopping floors and counting cash up to 4 a.m., that's a horrible job. They don't like it. So essentially the same thing here. Let's let these people focus on what they're good at. Let's eliminate things we don't need to. And you end up with better quality service and lower costs. Clinicians and administrators battle arbitrary cuts rather than working together and improve quality of care. So it's really all about changing the incentives so that people have the right incentives to do what improves the value equation. Bundle payments. So by bundle payments, essentially you're taking a patient, you're saying, here's your condition, here's the cost to get you to the end point. Versus say, we're going to treat you this for your hypertension, this for your diabetes, this for this. No, we have this patient, this is what they need. This is the cost for treating this patient. Neither the dominant payment models in healthcare, capitalization, that's HMOs and those kind of things, and fee for service directly reward improving value. Global capitalization, a single payment to cover all a patient's needs, rewards providers for doing what? Doing less. Okay, that's the wrong thing. Fee for service encourages you to do what? Do more. Capitation encourages you to do less. Neither one of those is what he wants, right? One hurts the numerator, one hurts the denominator. Fee for service couples payment to something providers can control, how many of their services they provide, but not to the overall costs or the outcomes. Providers are rewarded for increasing volume, but that does not necessarily increase value. The payment approach best aligned with value is a bundle payment that covers the full cycle of care for acute medical conditions. So some of these, you get the list of 6 things. He has some really good quotes you could pull in to explain that. Do overall care for chronic conditions for a defined period, usually a year, or primary and preventive care for a defined patient population, healthy children, for instance. Payment is tied to overall care for a patient with a particular medical condition, aligning payment with what the team can control. Providers benefit from improving efficiency while maintaining or improving outcomes. Sound bundle payments models should include severity adjustments or eligibility only for qualifying patients. So, you have to adjust. I mean, if you're in Florida and everybody's 70-something years old, that's going to be different than if you're wherever young people live, California, and you got a bunch of young, healthy people. So you have to adjust that. That shouldn't be that difficult to do. We have population data. Can guarantee care guarantees that hold the provider responsible for avoidable complications. So you got to measure those avoidable complications. Stop loss provisions that mitigate the risk of unusually high cost events, and mandatory outcomes reporting. Here he gives an example. Walmart introduced a program which encouraged employees who need chronic cardiac, spine, and selected other surgeries to obtain care at one of just 6 providers nationally. So essentially, he wants to shut down. This sounds terrible. He essentially wants to shut down a lot of community hospitals and just do away with them. So people have to travel much further, but 6 providers nationally. High volume, they track records of outcomes. So the Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, and Virginia Mason, those are the ones you'll see a lot. Although we saw Cleveland Clinic being compared to the doctor from India, and their costs were still, his costs were like 99% lower, or 95% lower. The hospitals are reimbursed for the care with a single bundle payment that includes all physician hospital costs associated with both inpatient and outpatient. Employees bear no out-of-pocket costs for their care, travel, lodging, meals, as long as the surgery is performed at one of those centers. So is Walmart still doing that today? That'd be interesting to see. Walmart has what, 2 million employees? So Walmart can be the test case for some of these things because they have such a large number of employees. I don't know what percentage of their employees have healthcare because they have a lot of probably high school minimum wage. All right, so eliminating, especially on the most complicated cases, eliminating a lot of hospitals and moving to a concentrated system of a few hospitals. Then integrated care, there are huge opportunities for improving value as providers integrate systems to eliminate the fragmentation and duplication of care, to optimize the types of care delivered to each location. To achieve such integration, organizations must grapple with 4 related sets of choices: the scope of their services, the volume in fewer locations, the right location, and then integrating the care across locations. One thing I wish that movie would have done better, and is actually have a full discussion of one of those teams dealing with the patient, what all they're discussing, what decisions they're making. That would be really, really fascinating to me. It seems very expensive and time consuming, but you hope on the other end it's saving a lot of money because there's not duplicate care, unnecessary care. He goes in, if you're not sure about some of these, you can read through, his more lengthy discussion. A recent study of relationship between hospital volume and mortality for high-risk types found that as hospital volume rose, the chance of a patient dying as a result fell as much as 67%. Often much better off traveling longer distance to obtain care at locations where there are teams with deep experience in conditions. 67%. That's the chance of dying. That was the first thing he had on his list. You can reduce that 67% by simply telling someone you got to travel, 4 or 5 hours. It goes, would you travel 4 hours if you reduce your chance of death 67%? Well, that may be worth it a little bit. Less complex conditions or routine services should be moved out of teaching hospitals into low-cost facilities, matching the complexity and skills needed with resource intensity, which not only optimize costs. So he's not only saying move these complicated ones to these concentrated hospitals, but in those concentrated hospitals, move stuff out of them to these clinics, neighborhood clinics, the easier things to treat. I mean, I had pneumonia a couple of years ago. I went to a clinic. He gave me some pills and I was fine. I didn't see, it was I was still riding my bike. So I guess I had cycling pneumonia, not walking pneumonia, but I had actually went in and told him what I had because I researched it. And he was like, yeah, that sounds good. Here's some pills. So, but these clinics, they're pretty low cost. They're pretty efficient. You walk in, it's pretty fast process. Are there things that are more conducive to what they have and have in place, given their more limited resources and probably lower paid staff? Yeah, there's things they should handle because there are things that are very easy for certain practitioners. So matching complexity and skills needed with the I love that. This is a really good quote right there. Matching the complexity and skills needed with the resource intensity of the location, which will not only optimize cost, but also increase staff utilization and productivity. These things seem obvious, but they're not being done because there's no incentive to do them. It's not like these hospitals don't already know that, but it's just the incentives need to change. And then overnight, you would see some pretty massive improvements. Geographic reach, superior providers for particular medical conditions need to serve far more patients and extend their reach. So that's very similar to number 4. To me, number 4 and number 5 are real similar. Obviously, you're going to locate these near large population areas. And then the IT, often IT systems complicate rather than support. What does a value-added IT system look like? Centered on the patients. Common data definitions. Right now, every hospital probably has their own systems and all definitions. Confidence encompasses all types of data. Medical record is accessible to all parties involved. This is somewhat, in some of the articles, we didn't cover them, we kind of skipped through them, but the digitization of the human body, that you have some chip on your phone or somewhere that has all your medical information there that you can hand to any doctor. I've seen that. I went to a place called Health by Design. They test everything, and they gave me a little disc I could take to somebody else and show it to them. So essentially, let's digitize that so we have all the information in a common format. The system includes templates and expert systems for each medical condition. So we need to have some standards that everybody's seeking to achieve. And it makes it easy to extract information. Obviously, right now, you have each hospital doing their own thing. Obviously, there's going to have to be some kind of concentration. Y'all remember who I said the gorilla in the room is for this? Who could drive this pretty easily? Medicare, Medicaid, they're the massive provider here. Anytime you're talking about standardized, Medicare is going to drive that. And hospitals aren't going to change their system until they're sure Medicare is accepting that template. So there's one customer that can really have more impact than anybody else. Providers that cling to today's broken system will become dinosaurs. Reputations that are based on perception, not outcomes, will fade. I'm not sure why this cartoon's here. Not real sure. I think it's a cartoon related to something else in the, so don't put this cartoon in your paper. So that sounds wonderful though, doesn't it? Sounds incredibly complicated and difficult to do at the same time. But he's arguing that Cleveland Clinic, Virginia, Mason, there's entities already moving to this approach. So it sounds like they're getting good results. So maybe it's not as difficult as you might think. You certainly heard some doctors on the video that seem to have that mindset. They were thinking like that. Weren't there some doctors in that video you were thinking, man, I wish this was my doctor? Isn't that the kind of person you want to see? So it sounds like there's people out there thinking this way. But to me, the idea that one community is going to be run by this hospital and they're going to be paid by how healthy their population is, that seems like a pretty complicated change in a system. The most difficult part of changing a system is the rent seekers, the status quo. The status quo hates change because they're making a lot of money on the current system, and they will fight hard not to let it change. That's why politics is so difficult. That's why any kind of change is difficult, because the stakeholders don't want to change. So yeah, it's not going to be easy change, but I love the concept. It makes a lot of sense. Any comments, questions on this? If you Google this, you'll find some more recent things from Porter, but it looks very much like this, and it really doesn't add much, and it's not as well organized as this, I don't think. Is this a system you would want to be in? Y'all are so young and healthy, it's like you don't really worry about this kind of stuff. But I mean, given that you're paying twice as much for health insurance because of the Affordable Care Act, you at least want it to be a little more efficient, so maybe that difference wouldn't be so massive. All right, so the key is just to summarize this. You kind of could see the main points there. All right. So let's go back to this rubric and let's make sure we haven't missed anything. So you have the introduction, something on the size of the problem, probably. Definitely an introduction. I want you to cover that, the low frequency, high severity. It's kind of that very first article. Healthcare should be like other insurance. That's a big thing we've been seeing. We should have less insurance, not more. Something on the players and their incentives. And we found some really, really good quotes on that. Then the problem, we gave some good examples of technology. Health insurance tied to employment, which is huge, which is also tied to the tax part of it. So we've got some good coverage there. Inefficient insurance model is again, to me, I tie it to the 80% claims ratio. Means every time insurance is involved. Costs rise how much? I remember. So the Affordable Care Act says insurance companies, if you get $100 in premiums, you got to spend $80 that on the patient. So that means if you did it yourself, it'd cost you $80. If you're doing it through insurance, it's going to cost you $100. So every time insurance touches something, how much does the cost go up? 25%. So how often do you want to use that model? As infrequently as possible. All right. Why? Because the entire insurance industry is this massive extra amount of cost. That's a lot of people. You got to pay that. You want to use that as infrequently as possible. Poor quality, I think there's probably more examples that I didn't copy and paste all of them in here because especially last class. But malpractice, I gave you some real easy ones on that one. Fraud and waste, I somewhat expanded that to just talk about the fact that there seems to be, pharmaceuticals and politicians and others seem to have some questionable ethical behavior because there's so much money in this system. Move the regulation down lower, focus on treatment. So there was a lot in that in the video on that. We talked about mammograms, PSA tests, those type of things. Overdiagnosis, again, the video talked about C-section screening, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and heart stents. And I gave you some good quotes on that. American lifestyles, there was a more recent article on there. Complexity of the system. Lack of price transparency. You got a little bit of that with the porters, talking about that. Remember on the inconsistency, you got to give me an example of cost and quality. Inefficiency encouraged. I love this quote. I'm paid more when I harm my patients. Hospitals make an additional $10,000 for complications. Information asymmetries. Obviously, doctors can have you stay more nights. Excessive government regulation, paperwork, and then my big thing was mandates. When the government says you have to do this, it's hard for a government. I forget, Hayek has a wonderful quote, but I can't remember what it was. But it's essentially this thing of when governments try to do something, they can't possibly consider the complexity of 300 million Americans and all the different factors. They've got to do a model that fits all, and it tends to be incredibly inefficient for a large segment because they can't think of everything. So government price controls, we had some pretty good quotes. I think especially that second article had some good quotes. All right, this one, we didn't talk about this one. I didn't give you much on this one, but it's easy. Let me just give you an example. I Googled it. And guess what came up? There is, it won't let me copy. Let's see if it'll let me copy this or not. Might not. I don't know where I got this from. There's a shortage of primary care physicians in the US with 5 footnotes. The Health and Resources Service estimates that provider shortage is over 7,000 physicians. The AAMC projects that by 2034, there will be a shortage of 17,000 to 48,000 physicians because of aging population and number of doctors nearing retirement. Also, specialists make more money in primary care, so there's an incentive for more specialists. So you can just Google that one. That one's pretty easy. There's several. When I Googled it, there's doctor shortages are here. Here's the AMA. Overcomes, Now there are some, this is on the extra, that 5%. There are some really interesting articles on how to speed up the creation of a doctor. There's been a lot of studies that, I've seen the, the TV shows, Grey's Anatomy kind of shows where they make the intern, the beginning doctor just makes their life look miserable. There have been studies that show a lot of that time is wasted. It doesn't make the doctor a better doctor. It's real stressful. And there have been proposals for better models. So you'd probably find some good articles on that. So you can just Google it and find that one. Pre-existing conditions. I talked about here tax credits, but on pre-existing conditions, you just got to discuss it. So how do you handle people who have a condition, don't have health insurance? My argument was tax credits, so essentially everybody becomes covered, but just talk through the issue. Baby boomers. So that's every country is facing that right now. Aging population, you can see it's the British spelling there. End of life care, I gave you quite a bit on that one, probably more than you need. Uninsured Americans, gave you some quotes there. You could probably find more current numbers on this. One thing I showed you in class is that the numbers have come down quite a bit since the Affordable Care Act. So it has achieved that purpose. On the solutions, we talked about moving to high severity, low frequency only. So eliminating a lot of insurance, move to medical savings accounts. My argument on moving to tax credits, or at least getting rid of the tax deductions. Consumerism is a huge one. We talked a lot about that. It's not just on the consumer side, it's also on the supplier side. How do you get suppliers to act as if they're in a free competition where they're trying to attract consumers? So I gave you several examples of that. Untie healthcare to the employer. You might not like that idea. So let's say you don't like that idea. So how do you handle it in the paper? An easy way you can take whatever you're adamantly opposed to it is say, in class, we discussed the idea of untying healthcare to an employer. I strongly disagree with this because of this. All right. So you at least address it, get the points, and then you show your side of the argument. All right. Reduce costs using technology versus technology increasing costs. And I gave you several examples there. Study even this of effectiveness. Here we're talking about evidence-based medicine. That's something you could read, you could Google. I'm not sure how much would come up, but I'm sure quite a bit would come up. There's actually books on it. Current best evidence in making decisions about the care. So plenty of stuff would come up. On quality, so we talked some about that with Porter just now, but how do you get information out on quality so the doctors and hospitals have an incentive to improve their system? Because they're obviously embarrassed by that bad number. This one's really easy. The provost, if you just say this, you essentially get credits. So just a simple thing. That kind of fits under info on quality is for process improvement. You got to start measuring that. How do we get Americans to be healthier? So we go beyond healthcare being doctors and hospitals and pharmacies to being everything about the body, exercise, diet. How do we get Americans? So several quotes in there. And then you might think here, how do it, so Porter, he wants to put some of this responsibility back on hospitals and doctors. Should the insurance change how they do things, how they pay for things? We gave some examples of that. That insurer would actually pay someone for getting a gym membership and losing weight. If they'll do that, we'll actually, give a big chunk of your premium back. One challenge to that is going to be the fact that it's tied to your employment. So if your employer is paying 80% of your health insurance, then the benefit's going to go back to the employer, but maybe they would, so how do you work all this out? But it's huge. Exercise is a very effective approach. Now we'll see with these new weight loss pills, maybe we don't need exercise anymore. And if we had a pill where if you took the pill, you go to bed at night and you wake up in the morning and your body's in the same shape if you just ran 5 miles, would you like that? That'd be kind of nice pill, wouldn't it? You have to eat a lot of extra calories. You could take 2 pills and you run 10 miles, but you don't notice it because you're asleep. That'd be pretty nice. I don't know if everyone's going to find that. Your bed would be kind of sweaty in the morning, but at least you didn't have to, you got to sleep through your exercise. So who knows? There may be some pill we create that solves everything, but right now, exercise, diet is the most effective treatment for a lot of things. I didn't talk about process improvements, but just discuss efficiency of system that does not care about efficiency. Y'all know Six Sigma, right? You have someone come in and say, well, it's this, you might use. So didn't Porter just give us some of that? If you got doctors, nurses, doctor practitioners, nurse practitioners. So I would, y'all know what I'm talking about on the Porters? Forget where it was. Yeah, I don't know where I found it, but it's in here somewhere. Fine. Practice. How do you spell practitioner? I would find it if I could spell practitioner. There it is. So right here on page 11 is a good example. It costs $4 for surgeon, $2 for internist, $1 for nurse practitioner. So that's Six Sigma. You make sure you have the right people doing the right functions and you reduce the cost, all right? I mean, I think I gave you all my example of just how inefficient doctor visits are, the staffs, what the people are doing. You can just walk into a lot of doctors' offices and it's like, man, there's a lot of wasted costs here. Just simple technology of sending text rather than calling people for appointments. You know, it's just so obvious. You got people in there on the phone constantly calling patients, leaving voicemails, the patient's calling back. It's such a waste of effort. And there's systems out there that are pretty amazing. For $40 a month, that entire thing can be converted to text message, automated on the computer. I mean, it's just amazing. And doctors, I told my doctor that, and I could tell he just didn't care. It's like, man, you could really cut your costs. I mean, it's his practice. You think he would care, right? If he could have 3 fewer staff, he has an army of staff doing nothing but calling patients. And it seems like such an incredible waste. So that's under the Six Sigma. CAP, end of life care. I probably, yeah, that's kind of the problem and the solutions. So I gave you a lot there. There's a lot in the video on that. Lower cost models, that one's pretty simple. All right, on this one, on Medicare for All, you can quote the first article, the second article, they talk about that. If you're in favor, make sure you consult the highlighted book because they give a lot of statistics on that. That Medicare is not as efficient and it does have some huge cost issues. And their main point, which I agree with them, is Medicare is financially in horrible shape. If we expand that to the entire population, what do you think the government's going to really get their hands around this? We have somewhat of a deficit problem right now with all the debt we have, and Medicare is going to be adding to that dramatically over the next 20 years. It's getting a little scary if you look at the U.S. debt. Politicians are not fiscally responsible because they won't be in office when this whole thing blows up. So they have an incentive to get votes by offering a lot of free stuff. So if you're going to do you can argue Medicare for All. You can go to Bernie Sanders' site and bring in his arguments if you like, but you have to address the fraud and the cost issue for Medicare. Medicare is defrauded. There's a lot of waste. And it's a huge deficit. It's a potential disaster for the U.S. fiscal situation. So you can argue for it, but don't leave out important arguments. Women versus men, I gave you that extra article on that. So, you know, you should be able to find, that's a pretty easy one as well. Why did I put it here? read it under the problem. The reason I put it here, and it maybe doesn't fit right here, but the reason I put it under solution is if it, maybe it falls under this very first bullet on moving the MSAs, because if you do that, women are going to be paying more for healthcare than men. So maybe it falls there. So it's kind of, make sure we consider that, and then pretty easy extra points there and points there. And then Porter, we just covered Porter, and then other. I've probably given you all at least 40 examples of other throughout this. Have y'all found one yet you're interested in? Find something you're interested in. And this, you don't have, this is not go and do a whole nother research paper. Add a paragraph or two and make it obvious in your paper. I want to do a little extra analysis on this. And so I found this webpage, kind of set it up so I know it's something outside of what we talked about and bring that in. All right. So that's the other. If I were writing this paper, I would define arguments and then examples. So define the issue, what are the arguments around it, and then give some examples. Arguments are discussion. So don't start with the examples. Define what you're talking about, why this is a problem or why you think this is a solution. What are the main discussions, pros or cons or whatever behind this argument? And then some examples to show that this is a problem or this is a solution. All right. So it's a long paper, but it's not, since I'm trying to do the research for you, so you just need to write it. So it's really an organization here. All right, questions on any of that? I'll try to remember to put this document out there. Maybe I should do it right now. One thing though, so this is not a perfect document, especially last class, the copy and paste stopped. So, but my guess is if I ask out if y'all want me to put this on Canvas, you're probably going to say yes. I've never had a class say no. All right, and you've got what, 4 weeks to write it? This is due like the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. If you're a little late, it's not a big deal, but I was thinking get it done before Thanksgiving so you don't ruin your Thanksgiving. Or take it with you to Thanksgiving and you really ruin your Thanksgiving and you can debate with your whole family on it, which would be even more interesting. I have had students that I love this a lot. I had one student, his mom was in healthcare. I can't remember if she was a doctor, internist or something. And he actually sat down and went through his entire paper with her. And he had a whole section and actually counted at it as his other. It's like, because it's really fascinating. So if you work in this industry, you have family members in this industry, I would count that as your other. Just sit down with them and go through this whole thing. And if they say your professor's an idiot, doesn't understand it, put it all in there. I need to educate as well. This is a complicated subject. None of us really has the whole picture. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. So this is a really tough paper for me to grade. So I'll probably be spending that whole Thanksgiving weekend grading them. So I can usually do maybe 4 papers a day, and there's 30 of y'all. So it's going to take me quite a while to get them. So I do need some on that Wednesday so I can start grading as quickly as possible. Y'all got it? Y'all ready to go? I will maybe next week. I'll show y'all an example paper, which I guess you'd want to do that. And so you can see. All right. So where do we go from here? All right. So we got a few products to finish up. I'm going to do this real quickly, probably in the next class. So we'll finish up these few products. Long-term care, disability insurance. We'll talk some about bioticals, which I think is real important to know on bioticals because this might be an issue that comes up for your family. You want to know about it. Group life, we'll talk a little bit about group. So we'll go pretty quickly. And then definitely next class, we're going to start pricing insurance. Most students find the pricing real straightforward. It's a lot of math and calculations, so they kind of like it. The first few examples, the hardest part of this is the symbols. So I finally threw in the towel last year and reduced the symbols on the exam because some students, I mean, the average was like 20%. So students weren't getting it. So, but if you're an actuary major, you need to know these symbols and how to use them. So we're going to do some examples. I can't remember what I put on the exam last year, but I greatly simplified it because too many students were missing it. When we get to the actual pricing, it looks complicated, but you're going to find it looks like 10, 15 different formulas, but you're going to quickly learn it's one formula. So when you get the pricing, you got dead people in the numerator, you got premium payers in the numerator. They're live people. You have dead people and live people. You just got to figure out how many dead people put up there, how many live people to put, and then you got to pick the end. And you'll find it's going to be pretty simple. Dead people die at the end of the year. Premium payers pay at the beginning of the year. So all you got to do is get that straight. And then what I do on the exam, and we'll do a couple of practices on this, I give you a crazy product that no one would ever sell, just to see if you can take that craziness and put all the D's and L's in the right place with the right ends. And I'll give you some tricks on how to do that. The first semester I did that, only one student got it right, and she wasn't an actuary, she was a finance major. Then I started doing in-class examples, and I would get 20%, 30%, so more. My least favorite are the blank, nothing. That is like, at least put something down. At least try. I mean, it should be obvious if I'm going to pay people if they die at 97, you need to put a D97 down. That's going to be pretty obvious. If people are paying a premium at 50, you can put an L50 in there. Pretty obvious. So some students just give up and don't do it all. But I've had more and more students get it right to the penny, which is, I think, pretty impressive. I had one student, the second time I did this, he got it to the penny. I discovered my solution, I had a typo in my solution. So I had to go back, and he got most everything right. So that's why I went back and checked my answers. Oh, wait, I put the wrong year in there. So hopefully one of y'all will do that. Hopefully I won't have an error. All right, so bring your calculators. We'll be doing some math on the exam. There's a lot of problems where I don't ask you to calculate the math. I just ask you to set up the formula. There's always 2 or 3 where you have to do the math. But a lot of them just give me the formula, and it's actually pretty straightforward. Most students get 100% on most of them, so it's not an issue. All right, so we'll hopefully start this, if not Tuesday, on Thursday. The ones that have a lot of math, there's YouTubes that go through them, so you'll get good practice for the exam as well. So, all right, so we're getting close. All right, we'll stop it there.